tonight I'd like to consider kingdom community. And really, as I see it, kingdom community requires interdependence. Kingdom community, another word for that would be fellowship. Koinonia would be the Greek word. It is a community that is moving together in response to God. But to be able to do that will require ability to live in interdependent connectedness. And so remember in Ephesians 4, it says, I'm starting in the middle of a verse, but it says, speaking the truth in love, which we could just end there, honestly. What does it look like to live in kingdom community? Well, it's learning how to speak the truth in love in a marriage or in a family or in a business or in a government. Speaking the truth in love is huge. Speaking the truth in love will grow to become, in every respect, the mature body, the mature expression, the image of Him who is the head. That's Christ. From Him, the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds itself up in love. So love is really the deep currency so that we can speak the truth in love as each part does its work. If we're going to grow up, every part needs to accept responsibility. Now, that's true in a faith group. That's true in a family. That's true in business. Let's talk about how to do that. So, Stephen Covey's book, I wonder how many copies that thing sold. Very valuable. That's a picture of it. I'm going to unpack it just to whip through, but to think through the ideas of there's a progression in his book moving from dependence to interdependence to independence and to interdependence. So let's look at those for a moment. So dependence is really when we're relying on others, and you can think of it in terms of the maturation process. A baby, a child is relying on others just to make it. It's where we're reactive to things. Things happen, we react. Could be emotionally, could be knee-jerk, but our life is lived in reaction to others. And we live life when we're in a dependent state under the circumstances, whether that's weather, or you even ask people, how are they doing? They say, oh, I'm doing okay under the circumstances. I've heard somebody say, well, what are you doing under there? That's a dependent living, that our life is subject to our circumstances, to weather, the atmosphere in the room, people's faces, all that could be making us reactive. And in that kind of dependent state, we're a victim to the stimuli coming from the outside. And those things or those people or those voices or those thoughts control us. It is a passive way of living. Again, passive, that others are really directing rather than we are. This is how life starts. Our hope is that we grow beyond that. That's part of what any kind of parenting or discipling is to do, because in that state we're left with kind of a lack of agency or initiative. We don't take responsibility, others take responsibility for us. In tax language, that person is a dependent. They're a child. I'm supporting them, I'm taking initiative for them, I'm taking leadership for them. From that space, from that stage, as Covey describes it, the next level of development is independence. And so in that, things shift a little bit. Now there is a sense of agency and responsibility. And you think of how people naturally grow. They're getting to be, some jump out to this earlier than others, many at different kind of adolescent stages. Sometimes adolescence can extend way into 20s, but there comes a point where people are taking not only responsibility, sometimes responsibility with an attitude on it, particularly if they're in the early stages of independence. This is where a person starts to actively take initiative in their in their lives rather than relying on others to do it. And they're responsive rather than just reacting. They take a beat and now they are starting to respond according to what they want to be doing, not just responding to the circumstances. To do that, in kind of Covey terms, the first stage of moving from dependence to independence has habits. And so the first one he has is to be proactive, and that is to take responsibility or initiate action in your life. Don't wait for others. And this may sound really simple, but when you get down to it, it is, you know, if you want to develop relationships, you have to be the one maybe to do the texting, to do the call, to whatever the thing is, you take responsibility rather than just waiting for it. And habit 2 is to begin with the end in mind. So to do that, we're thinking about our goal. What are we wanting to achieve? And now we develop a path to get there. As we grow in maturity, this becomes a way we think. But in the earlier stages, it's not how we think. And many people never learn this level of executive kind of function where they are actually going somewhere, and that picture of where I want to be a month from now dictates what I do now. That's another step of private victory or private mastery or private maturation. Habit 3 is that when we've got that, now we put the first things first, meaning that we work according to our priorities. Again, some people, due to personal preference or due to different things that have shaped their lives, they don't live by priorities. They live by the next thing. I've heard it said, the things that you want to accomplish, don't put them on a to-do list. Put them in your calendar. Put those in there first. Your to-do list are for the other things. But otherwise, we're not living according to our priorities. Some way, we need to make our priorities the first things that we're going after, not the last things. To-do lists, if you're like me, you have a to-do list, and when you only have 15 minutes, you're looking for the things you can fit into 15 minutes. That's fine for some things, but that is not building me towards the direction of the goal I want to achieve. It's helping me just check the box and get off the list. These kinds of disciplines, though, or habits, are really important. At one point, when I was in Boston for a good 25 of those years, I was part of kind of the prayer movement in Boston, facilitating a lot in there. I've had a heart for racial reconciliation and everything. And at one point, a couple things. One, it felt like I wanted to see racial reconciliation a lot more than African American pastors. They would blow me off in terms of like coffee or things like that. We'd set up an appointment. They wouldn't come. They're too busy. And one day I was meeting with what I would say was the leader of the African American churches in Boston. He was one of the most important people in Boston. And we're having coffee, and he said, and I'm talking about like, what is the deal here? And he said, well, this is hard to say, but I don't think that the Black church is mature enough to be able to do kind of interdependent living. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And his perspective was, because we have been mistreated so long, we come to the table either looking for what we can get or looking to be important. But we're not at a place where we can actually speak kind of the truth head to head, face to face. There's such a despairing value. And I was taken aback at him saying that. And then I realized I think there was a lot true to that, and it fits into this process. If you don't have private victory, if you don't have the sense of identity or clarity, You can't function well in the public sphere. You have to build these habits of being proactive, having a sense of direction and goal, putting first things first. We move into the second half of the 7 habits, and that's moving towards public victory. Now we're moving towards interdependence. Habit 4 is to think win-win. Now that's interesting, isn't it? When you think of like how our government works at this, or political spheres, it's win, not win-win. It's win. We win, you lose. So we listen that way. When a relationship is going bad, it's a win-lose relationship. If we haven't been built to a place where we know who we are and where we believe that the other person might have some value, we will always think win, lose, or lose, win. If I've got a really bad self-image, I'm going to assume I'm going to lose all the time. Healthiness, and for us to be a benefit or mutual benefit in the public sphere, we have to come to a place where we are thinking win-win. And to do that, when we establish that's what I want to be like, here's the first step to do that. And that's to seek first to understand the other person, then be understood. Again, you've heard this before, but what do you do in the heat of battle? You want to make sure people understand you. That's immaturity. That is not helpful in the public sphere. First, we're honoring, we're listening. We are believing our turn will come, but we are waiting. We are honoring the other person or the other group. If we can't do that, we're not trustworthy enough to be listened to. Honor others, take the time to understand them, wait your turn. Sounds almost like elementary school lessons. Yet we can't pull it off in our political sphere at this point, I don't think. And habit 6 is to synergize, and that is saying, from Ecclesiastes, that 2 are better than 1. They get a better return for their work. 2 horses don't just pull twice what 2 horses pull, they can do significantly more than that. Synergy comes out of different people thinking, working together towards the same direction. That you have to kind of like have those visions in order to be willing to think win-win, and you have to think that way in order to be able to listen first to understand. There's a last habit in there. So those are 6 things. There's a private victory and a public victory. And then that kind of like circle around the outside is to sharpen the saw. And that's to take time, make margin in your life so that what you're doing can actually renew your body, soul, and spirit. And this is really important. I was coaching somebody yesterday, actually is a oversees a number of churches in, I don't know, it's the Eastern Canada area. And she's is a leader in this denomination. They pastor a church, she and her husband. She's the assistant pastor with her husband, yet she oversees 275 churches. And she said at this point, their house is it got mold in it, and they're just finding all these things. They're into $150,000 worth of repairs on their house on a pastor's salary. I mean, they're in difficult times. But she said her husband is on the front end of burnout. She said he's not in burnout right now, but he's on the way. So he'll be taking some months off. Why? He's going to need to renew his body, soul, and spirit, or he's going to be shot. He's going to wear out. And shot's maybe not a good term for it. He's going to wear out. We find that when we're not sharpening the saw blade is dull. We can still cut through a tree, but we're going to probably do damage to others around us. And so sharpening the saw is really important. The best way to do that, I'm submitting, is some measure of margin, rest, restoration. So that's Covey thing. Let me just throw in a last little bit of stuff to consider. And this is kind of personal kingdom development. We move from kind of chaos when we're children. We don't know what life is. How we hear little bits of stuff, and that continues. I felt like for a long time, we moved when I was young. We moved when I was 5 years old. I moved from California to Richmond, Virginia area. And then when I was 9 and a half, something like that, moved to Pittsburgh and then moved to Florida and then moved up to Boston. I found like in every area, there were things that made me feel like I don't understand what's going on. I think I'm dumb. And it was because they were emphasizing different things. You may find out if you go to a different church that the theology that you're operating under in another church, they're using different language, they're doing different things, and you may feel like I'm not very spiritually mature. I don't know what's going on. That kind of chaos piece. We grow into a place of lordship, and that's, this is kind of like just if there is a chronological order or sequencing in our spiritual life, that lordship thing starts to bring stuff together. At that point, I'm no longer trying to just piecemeal my life. I'm starting to rely on the truth of God's revelation, his word, but also his mastery in my life. At that point, now we can develop principled living. Covey's book is principled living, and that can be a value, but I'm talking about kingdom development. Lordship really, it precedes principled living. Principled living rarely leads somebody to lordship. Lordship will lead you to principled living, but that's not the goal. That ends up being kind of legal and judgmental. The goal is love. And out of that space, now we're relating to one another in kind of one another things, love one another, honor one another, pray for one another, forgive one another. Those dynamics are now healing of our soul. They're healing of one another, of each other's soul. Now we're in a community that can actually accomplish stuff. To function in that community, we go from this dependent state. When you think about when you come to faith, on the front end, you don't know how to do anything. You don't know how to read scripture. You're not sure how to pray. You need others to help you. You need a whole lot. And you're growing to a place to be what some would call like a self-feeder, where I can grow some because I'm learning now how to come to the Lord. I'm learning how to receive from the Lord. I'm learning how to receive from scripture. I'm learning how to receive benefit in community. From that place of from dependence moving to independence, that independence needs to now be under the Lord. It's not independent like I am the center of my life, I'm the center of my growth. In being a part of this program, you're not just wanting to clarify your life and how you operate on your own. No, we want to speak into your life. You want to speak into ours. We're under the Lord. He's the one who is developing our identity. From that space, we can move now into interdependence, and interdependence under the Lord is fellowship. Fellowship is being agreed in our followership of God. So we're following Jesus together, but those steps of dependence, independence, independence under the Lord, interdependence, interdependence under the Lord. Now that's kind of how some ways I would describe it. It's more parsing than you need, but it's a way to think about it. So in a sense, we're going from this kind of fractured, disintegrated life where kind of siloed, everything in categories that we're just trying to piecemeal. People opening the Bible, just reading a piece, getting little bits of spirituality. We're moving from that space, that kind of chaotic spiritual space, to now integrating. Things are coming together in wholeness, even in our understanding of ourselves. That's a lot of the curriculum, is to reflect these fractured, disintegrated pieces of our life, bring them together to understand what God's been doing, how he's forming us so that it's becoming integrated. So when Jesus says, what good is it for man to gain the whole world but lose his soul? He's not in that passage talking about eternal life in heaven and hell. He's talking about losing your soul. Your soul is disintegrating because you're going after a thing in the world, whatever the thing is, but it's taking a toll on your soul. What we want is this integration, and out of that space now is our life investment. This is how I'm formed. I'm submitting that to the Lord, and I'm asking it to be magnified and his favor on it to be a benefit and impact. At that point, we're living on mission. We're living with a purpose that uniquely fits us. So let me go back to just those verses again. Speaking the truth in love will grow to become, in every respect, the mature body of him who's the head. That's Christ. From him, the whole body, joined and held together by every supporting ligament, grows and builds its stuff up in love as each part does its work. I don't know what my work is if I don't know how he's equipped me and how he's called me. So those two pieces of speaking the truth in love is kind of how we want to live. Us doing our part is the clarity of our unique design. Putting those together in community releases this kind of synergy that has power. So when you think of those 7 habits, I'd like you to just take a moment and think about how you're doing. Are any of those you're particularly pretty decent at, or are any of those hard for you and challenging? It might be worth you jotting them down. Or if you have any question about them, we'll talk about it in just a moment. But I wanted to just put those in front of you one last moment to consider how you're doing in your own moving from dependence to independence to interdependence.